Awesome. Let's move into Vinnova then.
Yes.
And this is, of course, let you instead describe it. How would you describe what Vinnova is and their vision and mission, so to speak?
Yeah, so Vinnova is a state, agency, governmental agency for the innovation system in Sweden. And our mission is to enable, innovation that makes a difference, to ensure that Sweden is a competitive force and is moving in a sustainable direction.
And sustainable can be interpreted in many ways. Can be environmentally sustainable or economically sustainable. What's your definition of sustainable here? What's your thinking of that means?
Yeah, so I think that framework with the 3 pillars is quite good. Economic, social, and green.
Yeah, classic sustainable definition. Yeah,
easy one is good to understand.
Yeah,
if you want to do it more, if you want to do it more complex, perhaps you can have that we do with Agenda 2030 to try to break it down. And it's a very good framework, and it sets the highlight on important different issues that are not just green, or what do we mean by green, for example? It's water and so forth. The challenge sometimes is with Agenda 2030 and that you compartmentalize things. Sometimes it gets treated like 17 different goals that are distinct. So that's sort of like a good thing with the 3 pillars: simple, communicable, but not sufficient as an operational tool.
And for people that don't know how it's operated or funded, this is government funded, right? And can you give some numbers? What's the turnover, or how much do you invest per year and things like that? And how many people are working there? And just give some concrete numbers.
Yeah. So we are approximately 200 FTEs, full-time equivalents.
We all use that. I do too. FTEs. Oh my God.
Can you repeat that? The not employees, but...
Yeah, so we are roughly 200 FTEs, and most of them are full-time employees.
Do you use that term, FTE?
Yeah, FTE, of course, yes, but not. You said something else than employees, didn't you?
FTE, full-time equivalent. This is enterprise speak.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it includes part-time people and consultants as well?
No, we're into FTX.
No, just our own employees.
So if you're an FTX, you're not the real person, right?
Oh, okay.
FTC, FTE, FTC, FTX.
Yeah. So for 2021, this year, we have a budget in terms of funding projects or initiatives, you should say, because it's not just projects as such. It's 3.6 billion Swedish crowns.
That's a good number, right?
Yeah, so it's certainly a lot of money, and we're so glad we got an increase in the research and innovation bill last autumn, or really it's the budget really, but it stems from that.
And how does it work from a governmental point of view? Vinnova is sort of it's all money channels through Vinnova. There are several agencies, like we have RISE as well and stuff like that. So what's the Vinnova focus, or is it a difference? Can you put a label on?
Yes, I think we have to distinguish between those that operate in the system and those that support and finance the system.
Nice.
So Vinnova and the Research Council, Formas, the Growth Agency, we are supporting and funding the system as such in different, easily put, different maturity levels. The Research Council is very much basic research. Formas in different areas, more leaning towards basic research, but some applied research as well. And then Vinnova is obviously innovation and so forth. Really applied. And then the Growth Agency is more dissemination, easily put, in a regional perspective on that.
So what do we mean with dissemination and regional perspective?
So they have something called, for example, Digiliftet, digital lift or growth. So how can we ensure that it's things that are very much needed in the system, but it's not innovation? So for example, how can we get all manufacturing firms be more digital? it's not about innovation really. It's about disseminating, ensuring that tools and stuff like that are put into practice.
And just to give the Swedish names for people that don't recognize that, Research Council, you mean Vetenskapsrådet, right?
Indeed.
And growth agencies Tillväxtverket?
Yes.
And Vinnova is Vinnova.
Vinnova is Vinnova. Growth agencies sounded cooler than Tillväxtverket, but no.
It's hard sometimes to understand.
But actually, this is very important to understand the whole ecosystem, and I think that's something that that's why this is really interesting. When we've had the different, we talk about the AI ecosystem, so to speak. So, and how can we move Sweden, and how can I, as a startup, or how can I, as a company, tap into this? And I think I don't know this, and I know quite a bit. And I assume my colleagues don't know so much about this. So this is really good to get this overview.
And I think it's also one of the most powerful and best ways for politicians to actually try to support innovation and really promote economic growth and sustainable growth, you call it that perhaps instead. So I think people should be more aware of this. And I really like that they increased the bill, as you said, recently as well.
It was. How much was it increased, roughly?
For us, if I remember correctly, 550 million Swedish crowns.
That's substantial.
Yeah, substantial and much needed. And it's quite interesting if you look at innovation policy, how that has changed throughout time. And that gives you some perspective of our role. Because if you look at the first generation, it was very much, hands off from the state. Should be market driven. If it doesn't operationalize, if it doesn't fly, that's it. Then we sort of like in the next generation, it was realized, well, things that needs to be done doesn't always happen by themselves. We need some state intervention to improve the system.
And that's an interesting point, state intervention. How autonomous are you as an agency in Vinnova? I guess you have at least some different builds or departments like research and innovation and other parts that are given separate budgets, or?
Yes, so we receive one budget. Okay. And compared to a lot of other countries, so for example, I visited Austria and Japan and so forth, we are very much autonomous in Sweden. For good and for bad. I think it's good in terms of trusting the civil servants, that they have the ears to the ground and have discussions and they know what needs to be prioritized. The problem, obviously, with the Swedish system is the fragmentization.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of initiatives that are bottom up, which is really good in terms of building on commitment, engagement, from the actors, from companies, from the public sector and so forth. The problem is sometimes, and that brings us to the third generation of innovation policies, how can you get directionality? Everything that is happening on a micro level is not necessarily moving us as a country in the right direction. Could be big gaps in terms of how could we miss this technology development and so forth. So we must not just improve the system itself. Sometimes we must transform the system. And
but one part of understanding Vinnova now, I'm not sure if I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I'm trying in the context of Vinnova. I really think we should explore innovation policy, and are Vinnova innovation policy setter or executor or facilitator? Because I think Vinnova is a key player, at least, in the scope of innovation policy in Sweden. So could we understand the innovation policy part? What do we mean with that? What is it? Because I think you have a very, very, very good grasp of this, and I think I don't. Yeah. And I want to learn.
Yeah, certainly. And very easy answer is we don't set policies. As simple as that. That is the government.
That's the government, right? So just to make it, this is a good topic, right? Government set policy, and then you are the agency, so to speak.
Yeah, so sometimes we can get tools to work with that. So for example, we have done policy labs sometimes to support, because we're
recommendations of policy setting.
Yeah, because we're sort of like, we're not doing, so for example, if you take the, if you look at the financial sector, for example, we can see and detect that there's a need for innovation, policy innovation here, but we are not an actor as such in that system. But what we can do is to support the agency that are in charge of that area and help them to be more innovative, to set up a policy lab, for example, because that's a concrete example. Because one of the critique towards that agency a few years ago was that, oh, you don't understand the fintech, the startups, the change that is happening in the financial sector with this fast-moving companies with new services. You don't understand us, and the regulation is not suited for us, and so forth. So what we did was that together with that agency, we set up a policy lab because we have the methodology for that, and we had some funding for that agency. So let's get together, set up a process for how can we interact with those so you can understand the needs. And if need be, you can poke then towards the government for new regulation. So that's one example.
So you are then orchestrating or facilitating, I should say, that whatever agency should make policy in some area, but they don't maybe have the know-how from an innovation space, that you help them to shape it because you have the methodology how to go about it, and maybe you have to. Okay, but what do we mean with innovation policy? Sorry, I'm stupid. What is innovation policy?
Is really the rules that sets the game, and sometimes it's the rules and regulation as such. Are they supporting innovations, such as procurement rules, for example?
Interesting.
There's one aspect of it. Another one could be which is a pure innovation-oriented regulation that some countries use. One of the most perhaps easiest examples to raise is sandboxes. So sometimes we don't want innovation with the rules in the actual operations because, well, let's think this through. Rules and regulations are there for a reason. We don't want it to be, the full storm in the actual market. So sometimes what governments do is to set up a sandbox saying that in this particular area, with this particular project or this particular set of rules, you are allowed to go outside of that box and experiment. And that is implemented quite differently. But one example could be in housing, where we see that there's need for different kind of houses, but the rules, they are quite explicit in terms of the space that you need to move around for good reasons, for wheelchairs and so forth. But sometimes it makes it impossible to build small flats cheap. So that would be one way to, let's say, we allow you to, within this site, move around these rules to experiment and do research and test. And if it works out, then we might change the rules. So that's called a sandbox, and the different kinds of sandboxes.
So this is examples of innovation policy, or basically policies of how it's okay to innovate, but in a safe way, but still allow innovation.
Yes.
Something like this. Yeah.